Alright guys, welcome to another video from XF Motorsports. This is going to be part 3 of project SEC V12, in which we're taking a nice Mercedes 500 SEC and putting a massive V12 bi-turbo engine in it. So in the last video we placed the engine, we made sure it fits in the car and found its proper place where it would line up with everything else. In this video we got to make the engine mounts and a transmission mount so that everything can be in its final place, because turbos and other parts are on their way, and hopefully by the next video when they come in we want everything to be in its place. And well, Stefan is going to be doing some of the fabrication.
Doing some of the fab. So we're going to, for the engine mounts, we're just going to cut up some plate steel, do some CAD design, which you'll see in this video, and get everything mocked up and bolted in, hopefully.
Yeah, so let's get started with the engine mount brackets, and then get onto the transmission.
Go from there.
Yeah. So starting off by showing you guys what we have and our plan for making the engine mount brackets. So, wait, careful. So with the covers out of the way, there's pretty good access to the engine mounts actually, so well, where the engine mounts have to go. So we're going to be using the same locations of engine mount that came on this chassis, so we don't have to do any major cutting or anything on the chassis for this car. And luckily enough, the place where the engine mount brackets used to go on the engine lines up almost exactly where it was supposed to be on this car, so that really works in our favor. All we really need to do is we need to make 2 plates over here that are going to be the same bolt pattern that of course this engine had, and then we're going to weld some more sheet metal from there and connect it to these points, and that's going to then secure our engine in place. And of course once the engine is in place, then we can move on to the transmission. So Stefan started off by cutting the plates that we would bolt to our engine, and yeah, once these plates were cut we actually bolted them to the engine and then positioned the engine in its final place, which basically gave us a good idea of what type of engine mount brackets we needed to make. So after a few minutes of trying to level the engine and position it properly where it should go in this car, we have been able to, well, level it and find a place where everything will clear at the front. The radiators will nicely fit in now, even the fan will go behind the radiator. It is right up against the firewall now. We had to take this plastic thing off the wiring harness to like bring it up closer to the engine, so things are pretty tight at the back, but that's the way it's supposed to, well, that's the best way to put it in the car so that everything lines up properly. Next we put these plates over here that we plasma cut and drilled holes in, which we're gonna turn into the engine mount brackets pretty soon. And yeah, at this position the hood will close, the oil pan is clear from the bottom, the transmission lines up with the transmission tunnel, which we're going to be getting to next after this when we put the transmission in. So now that all those points are right, now that we know that everything is going to work in this position, when the engine is in this position, we can make the engine mounts around this and mount the engine over here. So once we had a good idea what dimensions our engine mount brackets had to be, we drew everything up in CAD and did a bit of FEA just to make sure that the engine mounts we were making would be strong enough for our application. Once we had that figured, next it was back to Stefan to actually cut and make these engine mounts. Now usually I hate grinding the bells off, but since Stefan wanted to make these brackets look a little more sleek, he decided to grind everything away and yeah, make them look a little better. So after quite a bit of work, here's a look at the engine mounts, and they're looking amazing. They look just like the factory engine mounts, and now to make them look more like the factory engine mounts, we're going to paint them in the same color, silver, so that they look like they're aluminum even though they're actually steel. But yeah, then we're going to put them in the car, and yeah, basically the goal with this project is of course to do everything in a way where like it looks factory, nothing looks out of place on this car, and also everything with these mounts will now bolt up to the factory engine mount locations, so we didn't really have to do any modification to the car. So here's a look at everything after the engine is finally held under its own weight in the car. And yeah, these are the engine mount brackets. Now finally they're bolted in place, and now the engine doesn't move around anymore. It's not being held by jack stands or anything. It's actually mounted properly in the car, which is pretty cool to see. And the engine is, of course, really close to the firewall. We've had to take these wires out of the plastic duct that they were in to get the engine this close to the firewall. This was pretty much the only place we could have put it to make everything line up. So it's a pretty tight fit, but a really good fit nonetheless. Next we need to, well, lift up the car now. We need to get to the transmission, bolt the transmission up, and then start working on the transmission mount bracket so the transmission can also be mounted in place. So here's a look at things underneath the car with the engine in place, and things are lining up amazing. Like the transmission tunnel where the transmission is supposed to go is exactly lining up there. The tunnel in this car is, of course, pretty tight, so that might still be a tight fit trying to put the transmission in. But we'll try to we'll try to remove all of these things out of the way first, the brackets and all the things that we don't need anymore. So after putting the transmission in place, things are looking way too good, way too easy. This one, the transmission lines up perfectly with the transmission tunnel. This is the actual original transmission mount bracket from the car. Fits right in, almost exactly lines up with the transmission mount. The two holes are just slightly off, so we just got to make a new plate over here. We're just going to cut this down a little lower, make a new plate over here, so the actual transmission mount, which is the original from this transmission, will bolt right up here. And even the
are good and everything's good. Drive shaft lines up. Like, we couldn't have asked for anything nicer.
Yeah, definitely. This is like so far turning out to be the best swap ever. Yeah, everything just lines up. Like, this chassis was actually built for this engine and transmission. It's crazy. So after putting the transmission mount in place, well, doing a little bit of modification on the transmission mount, we're going to clean this up and paint it later, but for now we've just put everything in place just to make sure that it all fits and everything. And yeah, for sure, now you can see the engine and transmission sitting in their perfect place, how they line up in the car, and they're looking extremely good. We're going to be changing the oil pans on the engine in a bit later, but for now we want to get to the drive shaft because everything is lining up perfectly. It's a really good time to connect the drive shaft, and lucky enough, the diameters of both these drive shafts, the drive shaft in this car and the drive shaft that came out from the original car that, well, this engine and transmission came out, exact same diameter. All we need to do really is that we need to bolt it there, see how long we need to make it, cut it there, weld these two halves together, and that's it. We already have a drive shaft. So after that, Stefan got started with replacing the oil pans on the engine. This engine, if you remember from part 1, the car was in a bit of a crash and the oil pans underneath were actually broken, and also the oil pump had a bit of damage on it. The pickup was broken. And once that was out of the way, I got started with building the two halves of the drive shaft together. Now we are going to be balancing this one later, but for now we just wanted to put everything together so that we can actually make sure it fits in the car. So here's a look at everything underneath the car after the drive shaft is connected, and now pretty much the whole drivetrain from the V12 engine all the way to the back tires is actually linked. So it's crazy to think if the V12 engine was running right now, we could have actually even taken this car for a test drive as it is right now. But of course, well, we still have quite a bit more work to do before we get to that level because well, first of all, we need to put the oil pans back in. I did fix up the oil pump, the pickup that was broken on it. I welded that back together, so it all seals, it all works properly. The oil pump is actually spinning really freely now. The only problem was that it was a little misaligned because of the pickup breaking off, but there's no damage inside it. I inspected everything, it's all looking pretty good. So and yeah, of course, even the upper and lower oil pans, the new ones are here. But to put them back in, I was just waiting for the gasket that goes above the upper oil pan, that to come in because we need a new gasket there. So by the time that comes in, I think we are probably going to be taking this engine out. Well, of course, to do the electronics and turbos and all that stuff. So that's why I'll just wait till the engine is out of the car, just so that I can do that more easily. And other than that, well, Stefan was so excited, he's already started putting the radiators in place, preparing for the next steps, because next up, yeah, we need to link the radiators to the engine. All the cooling hoses, he was checking how they're lining up. Transmission cooler lines, we need to add an oil cooler with this, which we're probably going to mount somewhere over here. But well, the good thing about this car is there's so much space everywhere, you can probably put it anywhere, so we have a lot of option there. And after that, of course, also putting an intercooler somewhere, because this car is going to be making quite a lot of power, quite a lot of boost with the turbos, so it is going to need proper cooling. So that is something, yeah, we might even get started on that in the next video. Turbos are already on their way, so if they get in here in time for the next video might even be making headers, connecting those big massive turbos with this engine, putting the rest of this engine back together, and then after that just getting on to the electronics and getting everything else working on the car. Also, while answering some questions about why we went with the things we went with for this car, like for example, why didn't we change the differential to the S600 differential and the drive shaft and everything. So well, the reason is because we did consider both options, going with the S600 diff or this differential, but the thing was that there's not much difference between the two. This one has a diff ratio of 1 to 2.45. That one has a ratio of about 2.6. So not really a massive difference there. They're both open diffs, and well, looking at the condition, this one was actually in better condition than the S600. Even though it's a much older car, this car was in extremely good condition. So the differential has like no backlash at all, which is crazy to see for the age of the car. So this definitely must have been a really low mileage car. The odometer only says like 24,000 kilometers, which we're not sure if it's true or not, but either way, it seems like a really clean, really low mileage car. The S600 differential had more backlash than this, but really the main reason was there was no reason to change it, because everything over here would be strong enough to hold the power, because, well, the power the engine makes doesn't really determine how much power goes through the drive shaft. That's really just determined by how much power you're putting down with the tires, because any extra torque that is being put to the drive shaft is just going to be lost because of wheel spin. So even if this car had 10,000 horsepower, it wouldn't matter, because it's just the weight of the car and the grip you have at the tires that makes the difference on how strong your differential and pretty much everything after the transmission needs to be to hold that power. So doing the calculations behind this one, this drive shaft will actually be able to hold 1900 newton meters of torque before it will twist, and that roughly equates to about 1560 kgf on the tires, which means almost 1 gf acceleration with the weight of this car. So that, yeah, really means that it would pretty much be impossible to break this drive shaft in this car unless you put it on drag radials or something really crazy. And let me just lower the car, show you everything, how it's lining up from the top now that everything is in its final place. And here's a look at everything at the top when the engine is sitting at its proper place and everything. It's looking amazing. It's everything is lining up so well with the engine covers in place. It doesn't even look like there's anything that's done on the car. Even the silver on the engine cover lines with matches up perfectly with the color of the car. So looking at it, it almost looks like a perfect like this was some factory option, like getting a V12 in this car or something. It doesn't even, there's already been 2 people in the shop that I was trying to fool them into thinking this was an option, like V12 option that came back in the day, and they completely bought it. They didn't even like suspect that there was something done on this car right now. So it's crazy. This is like, that's actually how well everything is lining up. People don't even look at it and think there's something modified over here. So we want to keep it that way. We want to do everything else on the project too, so that the car on the outside and also while looking at everything looks completely stock, completely factory. But of course, when you'll drive it, it will be a 900 horsepower, completely insane car. So can't even wait for the progress with this one and seeing how it turns out. And well, yeah, for the next video, that's really the part I can't even wait for, because turbos are going to be coming in really soon. We're going to be putting the turbos somewhere over here. We're going to be making custom headers for it, custom downpipes with the turbos. Then after that, after the turbos are done, we're going to be putting standalone electronics on this engine, controlling it with the Haltech ECU. After that, we're going to be taking the engine out of the car one more time, testing it on an engine dyno, making sure we get to our power goal of 900 horsepower. And after that, we're going to be putting the engine back in the car, connecting the transmission to a standalone ECU, putting an ABS system on this car, which it never even came with from the factory, and yeah, making everything else on this car work. So can't even wait for the outcome with this one. This is an extremely cool project. If you guys want to stay tuned with all this, definitely consider subscribing to the channel, hit the notification bell so you can, yes, get updates on whenever we upload a new video. That's going to be everything for now. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.